Imagine you are a Roman aristocrat, and you're attending this really lavish summer garden party. The year is 64 CE. The sun goes down over the Palatine Hill, and the host of this gathering, who happens to be the most powerful man on the face of the earth, illuminates the pathways of his private gardens. But he isn't using torches. He is using human beings. People covered in pitch, tied to stakes, and set on fire to provide light for the evening's entertainment. All while the host just kind of mingles with the crowd, dressed casually as a chariot driver.
Yeah, it is an image so grotesque and so deeply disturbing that it feels entirely fictional. I mean, it feels like a fever dream ripped from a horror film. And yet this is the historical reality we are confronting today.
Welcome to today's deep dive, curated just for you. If you are listening to this, you probably already know the caricature of the man who threw that garden party. We're talking about Emperor Nero. For 2,000 years, he's been history's ultimate villain. The madman. The tyrant who fiddled while Rome burned. The son who murdered his mother. The husband who kicked his pregnant wife to death. The autocrat who basically dragged the Roman Empire into a swamp of depravity.
Right, the charge sheet is just unimaginable. But we aren't here today to simply read a list of ancient atrocities for shock value. We are pulling from a massive stack of sources to dismantle that caricature and look at the terrifying mechanics of his reign. We are relying heavily on the ancient historical heavyweights, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio.
Men who wrote within a few generations of Nero's life.
Exactly. But we're also layering those accounts with modern archaeological perspectives, including some really brilliant insights from the British Museum's recent reevaluations, alongside highly specialized academic texts on Roman societal norms, death rituals, and the aesthetics of absolute power.
And the mission here is crucial because navigating these ancient sources is incredibly tricky. It's very fashionable right now to look at these wild ancient stories like the human torches or the collapsing ships we'll talk about and just dismiss them as fake news, as political propaganda written by the senatorial class who hated him. But we are treating these historians as primary witnesses. We are looking for a specific academic concept called convergence.
Convergence is basically the bedrock of ancient history. When you have multiple independent sources who, frankly, often had different agendas and wrote at entirely different times, reporting the exact same shocking behavior, well, we can't simply brush it aside as a smear campaign. We have to treat that core event as historically meaningful.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to do that, we have to employ a fascinating interpretive tool today, which is theatrical coding. The idea is that ancient writers didn't just record dry facts. They used highly dramatic, stage-like stories, often mirroring Greek tragedies, as a coded shorthand.
Yeah, they were trying to warn future generations about the mechanics of tyranny, about what happens when unchecked power is allowed to subvert nature itself.
Right, so we have to constantly ask ourselves, what is the literal truth of the event, and what is the theatrical code being used to explain the tyrant's psychological state? It's a demanding way to read history, but I mean, it's the only way to genuinely understand a man who ascended to the throne of the known world at 16 and died a public enemy at 31.
To understand how we get to human torches and theatrical coding, we really have to look at the genetic and political cocktail that created this emperor.
So Nero is born on December 15, 37 CE, in a coastal town called Antium, just south of Rome. But he isn't born Nero. His birth name is Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. And he is dropped directly into the heart of the Julio-Claudian dynasty during the reign of Emperor Caligula, who happens to be his mother's brother.
The environment he enters operates less like a royal family and much more like a heavily armed, highly paranoid crime syndicate. To understand the psychological baseline of Nero, you have to look at his father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. He came from a highly distinguished patrician family known for a genetic trait of having red beards. The bronze beards, they called them. But Gnaeus was notorious for a level of cruelty that shocked even the Romans.
Yeah, I was reading Suetonius' account of Gnaeus, and it completely shatters the illusion of the dignified Roman aristocrat. This wasn't, battlefield ruthlessness. This was casual, sociopathic violence. Suetonius tells us that Gnaeus threw a party and ordered one of his freedmen to drink an excessive amount of wine. And when the man refused, Gnaeus simply had him killed.
Just for refusing a drink. And the violence frequently spilled out into the public square, too. While driving his chariot through a village on the Appian Way, Gnaeus supposedly whipped up his horses and deliberately, intentionally, ran over a young boy, killing him on the spot.
He also gouged out the eye of a Roman knight right in the middle of the Roman Forum.
Right, the absolute center of civic and legal life in the empire.
Exactly, and he did it just because the knight was too outspoken in his criticism. He cheated bankers, he defrauded chariot racers of their prize money, But the absolute darkest detail is his reaction to his own son's birth. His friends are offering the traditional congratulations on the birth of a healthy baby boy, and Aeneas stops them.
He says that nothing that was not abominable and a public bane could be born of Agrippina and myself.
It is a staggering prophecy, and it forces us into the classic nature versus nurture debate. Was Nero biologically doomed by the tainted blood of the Aenobarbi? Or was he forged into a monster by the environment? Because his mother, Agrippina the Younger, was an equally formidable force, though her brutality was vastly more calculated and political.
Agrippina's survival instincts had to be unparalleled. She is the sister of Emperor Caligula. When Nero is just a toddler, she gets caught up in a political conspiracy against her brother. So Caligula exiles her to a remote island and completely seizes Nero's inheritance.
So for the formative years of his early childhood, Nero is separated from his mother. He's raised by his aunt in an incredibly precarious position, knowing his uncle could have him executed on a whim.
That underlying trauma, the constant hovering threat of annihilation, really defines the Julio-Claudian court. That threat only subsides when Caligula is assassinated in 41 CE by his own guards, and the new emperor, Claudius, recalls Agrippina from exile.
And when Agrippina returns, she returns with a singular burning directive, which is to put her son on the throne at any cost. But I'm stuck on the logistics of how she actually pulled this off. Claudius is her uncle. He already has a biological son, Britannicus, who is the obvious heir. How does an exiled sister of a disgraced, assassinated emperor maneuver her way into the center of power?
Well, she capitalizes on a massive political vacuum. In 48 CE, Claudius's third wife, Messalina, is executed for treason and adultery in a spectacularly messy public scandal. Claudius is politically weakened. He desperately needs a new wife to solidify his standing with the aristocracy and the military, and Agrippina holds the ultimate trump card.
Which is her bloodline.
Exactly. She is a direct biological descendant of Augustus, the founder of the empire. Marrying her gives Claudius unassailable legitimacy.
But marrying your own niece, even in ancient Rome, where the rules of marriage could be flexible among the elite, that was a massive scandal. I mean, it was legally defined as incest.
It was. The Senate literally had to pass a special decree changing the Roman legal code to make the marriage permissible. That alone demonstrates the sheer political gravity Agrippina wielded. Once the marriage occurs in 49 CE, she relentlessly and systematically dismantles any opposition.
She convinces Claudius to adopt her son. So Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus is transformed into Nero, Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. Claudius adopts him and crucially makes him joint heir alongside his own biological son, Britannicus.
And she doesn't stop there. She then forces a marriage between Nero and Claudius's daughter, Claudia Octavia, completely cementing Nero's claim to the dynasty.
And she does all this while controlling access to the emperor himself. She has rivals exiled. She places her loyalists in key positions. Most importantly, she installs Sextus Afranius Burrus as the sole prefect of the Praetorian Guard.
Let's talk about the Praetorian Guard, because I think a modern audience pictures them as essentially the Secret Service. You know, men in suits with earpieces protecting the president. But they are so much more dangerous than that.
Oh, absolutely. They are an elite military force garrisoned right inside the city of Rome.
But politically, they function almost like a heavily armed corporate board of directors. They have the power to ratify a new emperor or violently remove a sitting one. By placing Burrus in command of the guard, Agrippina essentially secures the military backing for Nero's eventual succession.
Which becomes relevant much faster than anyone anticipated.
Yeah.
We move into the period of 54 to 59 CE. The golden boy ascends. Claudius's health is failing. Agrippina knows she's in a race against time because Britannicus, Claudius's actual biological son, is approaching manhood.
Right. If Britannicus comes of age, he becomes the undeniable heir. But then, in 54 CE, Claudius conveniently dies.
Just incredibly convenient timing.
Very. And the ancient sources, Suetonius and Cassius Dio in particular, are unified in their assertion that he was murdered, specifically pointing to a dish of poisoned mushrooms served by Agrippina.
Now, I know modern toxicologists and historians love to debate the exact medical cause of Claudius's death. Was it a heart attack? Was it cholera? But does the medical reality actually matter as much as what the Romans believed happened?
In terms of the political fallout, no, not at all. In the Roman mind, and deeply embedded in the historical record, it was a calculated assassination by the empress. And the moment Claudius is dead, the Praetorian Guard, managed by Burrus, proclaims the 16-year-old Nero as emperor. Not Britannicus, Nero.
But Britannicus is still alive. He is still the biological son of the deified Claudius. He is a walking, breeding threat to Nero's legitimacy. And less than a year into Nero's reign, the cracks in the partnership between Nero and his mother start to show.
Yeah, Agrippina doesn't just want to be the emperor's mother. She wants to be the co-ruler. She expects to sit in on Senate meetings. Nero, finding his own footing, pushes back.
And Agrippina makes what might be the single most disastrous miscalculation of her life. In a fit of rage, she threatens Nero. She tells him that if he doesn't obey her, she will take Britannicus to the Praetorian camp, present him as the true heir of Claudius, and have the military depose Nero.
It's a suicidal bluff. You just do not threaten a Roman emperor with a rival claimant.
Because the emperor's only logical response is to permanently remove the rival. Shortly after that threat, Britannicus attends a dinner party with the imperial family, and he dies suddenly at the table.
And here's where we must apply our principle of convergence. Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and the Jewish historian Josephus all agree on this point. Nero had his stepbrother poisoned.
The mechanics of this assassination are absolutely fascinating to me. It reads like an ancient locked-room mystery. At these high-level imperial banquets, the paranoia was so thick that every member of the royal family had a pregustator, an official food taster.
Right. Their sole job was to eat a portion of everything served to ensure it wasn't poisoned.
So, how do you successfully poison someone when a professional is actively testing their food right in front of them?
It requires a chilling level of premeditation and an understanding of banquet protocols. According to Tacitus, the assassins brought Britannicus a hot beverage that was perfectly safe. The taster drank it, suffered no ill effects, and passed it to Britannicus. But the drink was deliberately served scalding hot.
So he couldn't drink it right away.
Exactly. When Britannicus inevitably complained and asked for it to be cooled down, a servant poured in untasted cold water.
And the cold water was laced with the toxin.
Precisely. The poison bypassed the security protocol entirely. And the toxin was incredibly virulent. Tacitus writes that Britannicus instantly lost his voice, went into violent convulsions, and died right there in the dining room.
And what does Nero do? He's a 17-year-old kid sitting at a table while his stepbrother violently asphyxiates. Nero just leans back and casually tells the terrified guests, which, by the way, includes his mother and his wife Octavia, who is Britannicus' sister, that it's fine.
He just brushes it off.
He claims it's just an epileptic seizure, which Britannicus supposedly had a history of, and orders everyone to keep eating while the guards drag the body out of the room. It is just ice cold.
It is the moment the mask slips. Tacitus specifically notes Agrippina's reaction. She was struck with sheer terror. She realized in that instant that her son was capable of cold-blooded, premeditated murder of his own family, which meant her own status as his mother offered no real protection anymore.
But this leads to a massive contradiction that I find so hard to reconcile. Immediately following this brutal, calculated assassination of a young boy, Nero's government enters a period known as the Quinquennium Neronis, the first 5 years of his reign.
Yes.
And historians, even those who absolutely despise him, admit these 5 years were a golden age of moderate, progressive governance. I mean, the Emperor Trajan, decades later, said it was one of the best periods in Roman history.
The contradiction resolves when you look at who is actually running the empire. It wasn't the teenage Nero pulling the levers of state. The administrative power rested entirely with his two primary advisors, Seneca, the legendary Stoic philosopher, and Burrus, the military prefect.
They act almost like twin prime ministers to a volatile figurehead monarch. And they pass incredible reforms. They slash taxes. They crack down on corrupt tax collectors. They ban secret trials, bringing legal proceedings back into the public forum.
They even pass a law allowing enslaved people to file official complaints against their masters for physical abuse. That is a radically progressive concept for a slave-based economy like Rome.
But we have to analyze the hypocrisy embedded here. Seneca is arguably the most famous Stoic philosopher in history. He is writing brilliant essays on virtue, restraint, the rejection of material wealth, and the suppression of dark passions. Yet he is actively managing an empire for an autocrat who just murdered a child.
Right.
And in the process, Seneca is amassing a personal fortune so vast, it defies modern comprehension. How does Seneca justify that to himself? Is he playing the hero, genuinely believing he's the only thing standing between Rome and total tyrannical collapse? Or is he just an enabling hypocrite who likes the proximity to absolute power?
He likely convinced himself of the former while deeply enjoying the latter. He believed he could direct Nero's passions into harmless channels, poetry, music, chariot racing, while he and Burrus managed the grown-up business of running the world.
Keep the kid distracted while the adults govern.
Exactly. And from a brutal realpolitik perspective, the assassination of Britannicus secured the stability Seneca needed. By eliminating the rival, Nero removed the threat of civil war. The progressive tax reforms were basically bought with Britannicus's blood.
But that stability doesn't last, because the power dynamic is constantly shifting, and you can actually see this shift physically manifested. The British Museum exhibition highlighted the coinage from this era, and it tells a complete story without a single word of text.
Numismatics, which is the study of coins, is vital here because coins were the mass media of the ancient world. It was how the emperor communicated his power to a farmer in Gaul or a merchant in Syria. In the very first year of Nero's reign, the coins show Nero and Agrippina face-to-face as absolute equals.
Then, a year or two later, the design changes. Agrippina is now placed behind Nero. Their profiles overlap, but he is clearly in the foreground. He is the dominant figure.
And finally, by the end of the quinquennium, Agrippina's face disappears from the coinage entirely. She is erased from the official narrative of state power. It is a visual countdown to her demise.
Which brings us to the year 59 CE and the breaking of the ultimate taboo, matricide. Agrippina's political power is gone, but her influence is still a suffocating weight on Nero. She violently opposes his affair with Poppaea Sabina. She is constantly criticizing his lifestyle. So Nero decides she has to die.
But let's look at the mechanics of this. You can't just quietly poison Agrippina, can you?
Absolutely not. She was raised in the Julio-Claudian court. She wrote the playbook on assassination. Ancient sources tell us she took daily diluted doses of various known toxins, specifically to build up a biological immunity.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right, taking a little bit of poison with breakfast just to be safe. She also had her own loyal guards and spies. A direct assault or a poisoned cup was impossible. Nero had to devise a method that would look undeniably like an act of God, a tragic accident.
And this necessity births one of the most bizarre, over-the-top assassination plots in recorded history, the collapsible ship. Cassius Dio and Suetonius provide incredibly detailed accounts of this. Nero invites his mother to the resort town of Baiae on the Bay of Naples for a festival. He plays the repentant, doting son. He showers her with affection.
They have a lavish dinner, and at the end of the night, he embraces her tightly, kisses her eyes, and tells her, "Strength and good health to you, mother. For you I live, and because of you I rule."
It is the ultimate kiss of Judas. He then escorts her to a magnificent ship to take her back across the bay to her private villa.
But the ship has been engineered as a death trap by a man named Anicetus, a former tutor of Nero, who is now the admiral of the Roman fleet. Let's geek out on the engineering of this for a second, because it sounds like a James Bond villain trap. They loaded the canopy roof of Agrippina's cabin with heavy lead weights.
Right.
The structure was rigged with a mechanical release. On a given signal, the roof is supposed to collapse, crushing everyone in the cabin, while the hull of the boat is designed to split apart and sink.
But the complexity of the plan is its undoing. The execution is disastrously botched. They set sail. The sea is dead calm. It is a brilliantly starlit night, which immediately ruins the cover of a storm-related shipwreck. The signal is given, the mechanism is triggered, and the lead-weighted roof collapses.
But Agrippina and her close companion, Esronia, survived the initial trap. They are reclining on high-backed, incredibly sturdy dining couches. The size of the couches actually catch the falling roof, shielding them from the crushing weight.
Simultaneously, the ship doesn't sink as planned. The crew members who are in on the plot try to capsize the vessel by rushing to one side, but the sailors who aren't aware of the assassination attempt naturally rush to the opposite side to balance the ship. It creates absolute chaos in the dark.
Agrippina and Asronia manage to slide out from under the collapsed roof and into the water. And here, in the freezing water of the bay, Asronia makes a fatal, tragic calculation. She thinks they are just victims of a terrible accident. She sees rescue boats approaching, and she starts screaming, "Help me! I am Agrippina! Help the emperor's mother!"
She thought the name would guarantee her immediate rescue. Instead, the sailors in the approaching boats, who are Anicetus's men, immediately row over and brutally beat her to death with their oars and boat hooks, convinced they are finishing off the empress.
While this horror show is happening a few yards away, the real Agrippina realizes exactly what is going on. Her son just tried to crush her and drown her. She has a wound on her shoulder from the falling debris, but she keeps her mouth completely shut. She swims silently away in the dark until she is picked up by local fishing boats who don't know who she is.
She makes it back to her villa, and her next move is a masterclass in political chess. She knows Nero ordered the hit. Nero knows she knows. But she sends a messenger to her son with a carefully crafted lie.
The message essentially says, "Good news, I survived a terrible maritime accident by the grace of the gods. But I am exhausted. Please do not bother coming to see me. I need to rest." She is offering him an out. She is saying, let's pretend this was just an accident. We can both walk away.
But Nero is in a state of absolute panic. He knows Agrippina. He knows that the moment she recovers, she will send letters to the Senate, she will rally the legions, she will destroy him. When her messenger arrives at Nero's compound, Nero stages a piece of desperate theater.
Oh, this part is crazy.
It is. As the messenger is speaking, Nero covertly drops a sword at the man's feet. He then points to the sword, screams that Agrippina has sent an assassin to kill him, and has the messenger arrested.
He manufactures the legal pretext he needs right there. He immediately orders Admiral Anicetus and a squad of Marines to go to her villa and finish the job, claiming he's responding to an assassination attempt against the crown.
The Marines break into her compound. They smash through the doors. Agrippina is in her dimly lit bedroom with a single maid. As the soldiers surround her bed, the captain strikes her on the head with a club. The lieutenant draws his sword to run her through, and in her final moments, Agrippina bares her abdomen to the assassins and shouts, "Strike here for this boor Nero."
It is an incredibly visceral, unforgettable death.
Right.
But let's push back on the sources here, because this is where the academic concept of theatrical coding really comes to the forefront. I read that line, "Strike here for this boor Nero," and the elaborate self-destructing boat, and I have to ask, is this actual history? Or is this a scene from a play? Why build a cartoonish mechanical death trap when a knife in an alley works perfectly fine?
This is the exact debate modern historians have. Some argue Nero genuinely possessed a theatrical, over-engineered mind and loved the drama of the boat. But many scholars propose that historians like Tacitus, writing decades later, emphasized or even exaggerated the theatricality as a coded warning.
How does the code work in this specific context?
Look at the symbolism. A ship artificially splitting apart in the dead of night perfectly represents the unnatural, violent severing of the most sacred biological bond in Roman society. The bond between mother and son, and the mother bearing her womb, demanding to be struck in the very place that gave birth to the monster. It mirrors the language of Greek tragedy.
Like the plays written by Seneca himself.
Exactly. It is a literary device used to tell the reader, look at how absolute power fundamentally corrupts the natural order.
But the danger of recognizing the theatrical code is that it tempts us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If the boat is a metaphor, maybe the murder never happened.
And that is where the principle of convergence anchors us. The ship might be exaggerated, her final words might be polished for dramatic effect, but the core event, that Nero ordered the violent execution of his mother in 59 CE, is corroborated by every independent tradition we have. The body on the ground is real.
And the psychological fallout for Nero was profound. Suetonius writes that Nero was plagued by nightmares, that he felt haunted by her ghost, that he even tried to hire Persian magi to summon her spirit so he could beg for forgiveness. And the Roman public's reaction was explosive. Matricide wasn't just a crime. It was a profound spiritual pollution.
Right, we have records of anonymous graffiti appearing overnight all over Rome. In the Forum, someone tied a leathern sack to one of Nero's statues.
Which is a terrifyingly specific threat. The traditional Roman punishment for parricide killing a parent was to be sewn into a leather sack alongside a live dog, a snake, an ape, and a rooster, and then thrown into the Tiber River to drown.
Exactly. Another piece of graffiti was attached to an abandoned infant that read, "I will not rear you up lest you slay your mother." The populace knew. The Senate knew. And with Agrippina gone, the invisible guardrails holding Nero back began to completely disintegrate.
Which launches us into the period of 60 to 62 CE, unshackled tyranny and the purge of wives. Following the matricide, the two men who had actually been running the empire are neutralized. Burrus dies. Some ancient historians say it was natural causes, like a tumor in his throat. Others claim Nero sent him a medicine that was actually poison.
With the military backing of Burrus gone, Seneca realizes he is entirely exposed. He knows how the story ends. He begs Nero for permission to retire, offering to give back all of his vast wealth. Nero refuses the wealth, but allows Seneca to withdraw to his country estates. Suddenly, the 22-year-old emperor is completely unrestrained.
And without those restraints, Nero's behavior shifts into a realm that the Roman aristocracy found utterly horrifying. He doesn't just become cruel, he becomes an artist. He begins to perform publicly as a singer, playing the lyre, as a poet, and as a charioteer.
To a modern listener, a politician playing an instrument on late-night TV or participating in a sporting event might seem endearing. But we have to understand the Roman concept of gravitas.
Right, let's explain gravitas and why an emperor plucking a harp was seen as a literal threat to the state.
Gravitas means weight, dignity, seriousness, and moral rigor. The Roman male aristocratic identity was forged on military conquest, stoic endurance, and public service in the Senate. The stage, however, was associated with Levitas lightness, frivolity, and deception. In Rome, acting was legally considered an infamia, a shameful profession.
So actors were not celebrities like they are today.
Not at all. Actors were frequently enslaved people or low-born foreigners. They had stripped away their dignity for the amusement of the mob.
So when the Emperor of Rome, the descendant of Augustus, the commander of the legions, puts on a mask and begs a crowd of commoners for applause, he is fundamentally degrading the majesty of the empire. He is equating the throne with a brothel.
Precisely. To the Senate, seeing Nero sweating in a chariot race or acting out the role of a blind beggar in a Greek tragedy was a profound subversion of the social order. It meant the man holding absolute power had the emotional maturity of an entertainer.
But the cruelty was escalating right alongside the artistic obsession. In 62 CE, Nero decides he wants to formalize his relationship with Poppaea Sabina. To do that, he has to eliminate his current wife, Octavia.
Octavia is a highly sympathetic figure. She is the daughter of Claudius. She has impeccable imperial lineage. She is universally beloved by the Roman public, and she has done absolutely nothing wrong. Nero divorces her on fabricated charges of sterility and adultery and banishes her to a remote island.
The public reaction is massive. The citizens of Rome actually riot. They tear down statues of Poppaea and parade statues of Octavia through the streets, demanding she be reinstated. How does Nero respond to his citizens exercising their voice?
With overwhelming military force, he sends the military in to crush the protests, and the riots actually seal Octavia's fate. Nero realizes that as long as she is alive, she is a rallying point for rebellion, so he orders her execution.
And the method is agonizing. She is tied up, her veins are open, but because she is so terrified, her blood pressure drops and she doesn't bleed out quickly enough, so they lock her in a suffocatingly hot steam bath, where she slowly asphyxiates and bleeds to death. She's only 22 years old. Her severed head is brought back to Rome and presented to Poppaea on a platter.
It is an act of pure, unadulterated savagery. But the tragedy of the imperial household doesn't stop there. 3 years later, in 65 CE, Poppaea is pregnant with their second child. According to the ancient sources, Nero comes home late one evening from the chariot races. Poppaea angrily complains about his absence. Nero, in a sudden, uncontrollable fit of rage, kicks her violently in the abdomen, killing both her and the unborn child.
Okay, we need to pause here and apply our source evaluation instructions, because this specific story, the tyrant kicking his pregnant wife to death, always sets off alarm bells for modern historians.
And it should. The kicking the pregnant wife narrative is a highly established ancient literary trope. It is a shorthand convention used by Greek and Roman writers to signal that a ruler has devolved into an absolute monster. The exact same story was told about the Persian king Cambyses and the Greek tyrant Periander centuries earlier.
Oh, it's basically a motif.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When an ancient author uses this trope, they are essentially writing a neon sign that says this man is a savage who destroys his own future and bloodline.
So if it's a known literary trope, did it actually happen? Or did Poppaea just die from complications of pregnancy? Which, let's be honest, was incredibly common and highly dangerous in the ancient world. And the historians just pasted the tyrant trope over her death to make Nero look worse.
Well, the British Museum's analysis suggests it is highly probable she died of a miscarriage or severe complications during childbirth. However, it is vital to remember that just because an event is framed using a literary trope doesn't mean it is entirely divorced from reality. The trope was applied because it fit a well-attested pattern of behavior.
He was known for this kind of violence.
Right. Nero was emotionally volatile, prone to extreme outbursts, and possessed absolutely no restraint. The physical kick might be a theatrical invention by the historians, but the tyrant's terrifying rage that defined their marriage was an established historical fact.
And that volatility brings us to the summer of 64 CE, the defining disaster of his reign, the Great Fire of Rome.
The mechanics of the fire are staggering. It breaks out in the densely packed, highly flammable wooden shops surrounding the Circus Maximus. Fanned by strong summer winds, it creates a firestorm that sweeps through the narrow, twisting streets of the city. It burns uncontrollably for 6 days, seems to burn out, and then miraculously flares up again, burning for 3 more days.
When the smoke finally clears, the devastation is apocalyptic. Out of the 14 districts of Rome, 3 are leveled to ash. 7 are reduced to smoldering ruins. Only 4 districts remain untouched. Hundreds of thousands of people are homeless, and almost immediately, the rumor mill begins to churn with the accusation that Nero himself ordered the fire started.
The most enduring image of Nero is that he stood on a tower, dressed in his theatrical stage costumes, playing the lyre and singing a Greek epic about the destruction of Troy while he watched his own city burn, thrilled by the beauty of the flames.
But when we evaluate the sources, that famous image starts to fall apart, doesn't it?
It does. Tacitus, who generally despises Nero and misses no opportunity to condemn him, explicitly states that Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire broke out. He was at his coastal villa in Antium. Tacitus records that Nero rushed back to the city, personally directed the firefighting efforts, and took immediate, massive action to help the victim.
What kind of action?
He opened his own private imperial gardens to house the refugees. He constructed temporary shelters. He imported cheap grain from neighboring regions to prevent mass starvation.
And he even implemented new, highly sensible building codes for the reconstruction. Wider streets, restrictions on wooden structures requiring fireproof stone. So if he actually handled the crisis somewhat competently, why did the rumor that he was an arsonist stick so stubbornly?
Because of what he built on the ashes. Nero used a massive tract of the newly cleared, devastated land right in the center of Rome to build himself a mind-boggling mega-palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House.
The scale of this project is offensive. He essentially dropped a sprawling, luxurious country estate right into the heart of a burned-out metropolis. It had artificial lakes, pastures with grazing livestock, and woods populated with wild animals.
The architectural arrogance was unmatched. Suetonius describes the main dining room as a massive circular structure that was engineered to revolve constantly, day and night, mimicking the movement of the heavens.
A revolving dining room in the ancient world.
Yeah. And the ceilings of the dining rooms were fitted with sliding ivory panels that would rain exotic flowers and expensive perfumes down onto the guests.
Think about this in modern terms. Imagine a major city is wiped out by a hurricane. And instead of using the disaster relief funds to rebuild the citizens' homes, the president seizes the destroyed neighborhoods and builds a 300-room luxury mega yacht with a rotating helipad and a private zoo right where people died.
It is a masterclass in terrible public relations. Even if he didn't start the fire, the optics convinced the public that he did it for the real estate.
Nero knew the political temperature was reaching a boiling point. He desperately needed a scapegoat to deflect the rumors of arson. He needed a group that the Roman public already disliked and distrusted, and he found them in a small, obscure, newly emerging religious sect, the Christians.
We are in 64 CE. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified roughly 30 years prior. The Christian community in Rome is tiny.
Why were they the perfect target?
Because their practices made them highly suspicious to the traditional Roman mind. They met in secret, behind closed doors. They refused to participate in the civic state religion, meaning they wouldn't offer sacrifices to the Roman gods or worship the emperor. To the average Roman, this wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was dangerous. Refusing to honor the gods risked bringing divine wrath down upon the entire city like, perhaps, a massive fire.
And there were wild, terrible rumors about what they did in secret. Because they consumed the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ. The Romans thought they were literal cannibals. Because they called each other brother and sister, including their spouses, they were accused of incest. They were the ultimate outsiders.
Nero seizes on this prejudice. And the persecution he unleashes is not just a legal execution, it is a theatrical display of cruelty designed to distract the mob.
This is where we get the garden party from the beginning of our deep dive. Tacitus provides the grim details. Nero didn't just execute them, he degraded them. He had them covered in the freshly flayed skins of wild animals and thrown into the arena to be torn apart by a pack of starving dogs.
He had them nailed to crosses.
And most infamously, he had them tied to stakes, covered in flammable pitch, and set on fire to serve as human torches to illuminate his imperial gardens at night.
The cruelty was so extreme, so grotesquely theatrical that it actually backfired. Tacitus writes that despite the fact that the Romans hated the Christians and believed they deserved punishment, a wave of pity swept through the city. It became horrifyingly obvious to the citizens that these people were not being destroyed for the public good, but simply to glut the psychotic ferocity of one man.
The execution of the Christians is a prime example of historical convergence. It is corroborated by Roman historians and later Christian traditions alike. It cements Nero's legacy as the Antichrist in the eyes of the early church. And it marks the beginning of the end. We move into the final act, 65 to 68 CE.
The empire is fracturing under the weight of his paranoia and his spending. In 65 CE, a massive, highly organized plot to assassinate Nero and replace him is uncovered. The Piso conspiracy. It isn't just a few disgruntled elites. It involves powerful senators, wealthy knights, and crucially, senior officers within his own Praetorian Guard.
When your own bodyguards are plotting to kill you, the regime is effectively dead.
The plot is betrayed at the last minute. Nero's response is a terrifying bloodbath of mass executions and forced suicides, and this is when Seneca finally meets his end. Whether Seneca was actively involved in the conspiracy or merely knew about it and stayed silent is debated, but Nero orders his old tutor to commit suicide.
Seneca treats his own death as the ultimate piece of Stoic theater. He calmly opens his veins in a warm bath, dictating philosophical treatises to his scribes as he slowly bleeds to death, basically modeling himself after Socrates.
With Seneca dead and the last vestiges of the old administration purged, Nero's behavior detaches from reality entirely. And we must examine the story of Sporus because it reveals the absolute terrifying zenith of imperial power.
After he kicks Poppaea to death, Nero is allegedly grief-stricken. He finds a young boy, a freedman named Sporus, who bears an uncanny physical resemblance to his dead wife. What Nero does next is profoundly disturbing. He has the boy castrated. He then dresses him in the traditional bridal veil of a Roman empress, provides him with a massive dowry, and marries him in a lavish public ceremony.
He parades Sporus through the streets of Rome and Greece in the imperial litter, kissing him publicly, treating him in every legal and social respect as the Empress Poppaea reborn. Now, relying on academic texts regarding the aesthetics of Roman castration, we have to look past modern sensibilities. This wasn't just extreme sexual deviancy, this was the ultimate chilling expression of tyrannical, unchecked power.
Because he is fundamentally subverting nature.
Exactly. He is using his absolute authority to physically alter the biology of another human being, violently erasing their identity to mold them into a psychological comfort object. He is telling the world, I am so powerful, I can bend human flesh, I can make a man into a woman, I can resurrect my dead wife.
And just to shatter every remaining societal norm, during this same period, he also participates in a marriage ceremony with another freedman named Pythagoras. But in that ceremony, Nero puts on the veil and takes the role of the passive bride.
For a Roman emperor, the commander-in-chief of the most militarized society on earth, to publicly assume the passive, submissive role in a marriage is the ultimate destruction of gravitas. He has completely dismantled the ideological foundation of the empire, and eventually, the empire snaps.
By 68 CE, the provinces are in open revolt. Julius Vindex, a governor in Gaul, rebels. He is quickly joined by Servius Sulpicius Galba, the battle-hardened governor of Spain, who declares he is marching on Rome to restore the Republic.
The armies are moving, and Nero's support evaporates with breathtaking speed. The Praetorian Guard is bribed by agents of the rebellion to abandon him. The Senate, sensing the shift in the wind, finally finds its courage. They officially declare Nero a public enemy and sentence him to be executed mora maiorum.
Which means in the ancient style. So he would be stripped naked, have his head locked in a wooden fork, and be beaten to death with rods.
Right. Deserted by his guards, his friends, and his court, Nero flees the Golden House in the middle of the night. He rides out to a dusty suburban villa owned by a loyal freedman. He spends his final hours in a state of pathetic panic, ordering a grave to be dug, complaining about the dirt, listening to the approaching hoofbeats of the cavalry sent to arrest him.
Facing capture and a horrific public execution, he realizes he has to take his own life, but he can't bring himself to do it. He begs one of his companions to kill themselves first to show him how to do it. Finally, as the soldiers break down the doors of the compound, he forces his secretary, Epaphroditos, to help him drive a dagger into his throat. He is 31 years old, and his famous last words as he bleeds out.
Polis
Artifex Superior.
What an artist dies in me.
Yeah.
Those final words are the perfect epitaph for his reign. They encapsulate his ultimate terminal delusion. Even as his empire burns, as the legions revolt, as the executioners kick in the door, he does not mourn the loss of Rome. He mourns the loss of his own performances. He valued his identity as a theatrical artist over his duty as a statesman to his very last breath.
It makes you wonder, did he actually believe he was a misunderstood musical genius? Or was this the ultimate theatrical code? A perfectly scripted final line for a man who viewed his entire 14-year reign as nothing more than an elaborate stage play.
That perspective is critical when evaluating his legacy. The aftermath of his suicide was catastrophic. It sparked the Year of the Four Emperors, a brutal, globe-spanning civil war that permanently altered the DNA of the Roman world. It proved a terrifying new reality: that an emperor did not need to be a descendant of Augustus, and that an emperor could be made by the armies outside of Rome. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, the bloodline that built the empire, died in that dusty villa.
We have covered an immense amount of historical ground today. Let's pull the threads together. Our goal was to look past the cartoonish caricature of the fiddling madman and treat these ancient sources as primary witnesses. By looking for convergence, we've seen that the core of the nightmare was real. The murders of his mother, his wives, his stepbrother, the grotesque persecution of the Christians, these are attested historical realities. The cruelty was not a myth.
But by recognizing theatrical coding, we unlock an understanding of why the ancient historians recorded his crimes the way they did. The collapse in ships, the stage performances, the kicking of pregnant wives, the forced castrations. The historians writing decades later were trying to process the profound trauma of his reign. They utilized dramatic, recognizable literary tropes to explain the mechanics of tyranny, to warn us about what happens when a leader's unchecked power is allowed to subvert dignity, tradition, and nature itself.
And this is exactly why this ancient history matters for you, right now. Navigating the modern landscape of information overload requires the exact same skill set. You have to look past the sensational, the dramatic framing, and the theatrical outrage to find the converging truths beneath. It's about recognizing the codes that writers and media use to frame their subjects.
The truth of a historical figure isn't just found in the raw data of what they did. It is also found in the specific way their society chose to remember them.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly chilling thought to mull over. Think about our modern world. Think about the massive political scandals, the power struggles, and the leaders of today. If historians are writing the history of our current era 2,000 years from now, what theatrical codes or exaggerated metaphors might they use to describe our leaders? How will the cold, hard truth of our own era be hidden inside dramatic storytelling millennia from now?
It is a profoundly humbling thought.
It is, because history is not a clean, binary medical diagnosis. It's a stage play. It's murky, it's messy, and it is deeply flawed human. And sometimes you have to look past the collapsing ships and the dramatic final monologues to find the real mechanics of power lurking in the wings.
Emperors of Chaos, Nero and Trump. The stage is the throne. Monuments to the ego. Deflect and divide. Banishing the truth. The inevitable fall. Breaking the loop. The moment is now. Stop repeating history. Learn how to survive collapse and build what comes next. Join the Wisdom Guardians today.